Over the years, there are always paradigm shifts, One gets used to a certain type of environment, and then there are periods of time where they shift to a very different kind of environment. For example, the 1920s were the exact opposite in the 30s. So the transition from the 20s to the 30s shocked people. And so you come to periods of time where something has gone on for a long time, such as the easing of monetary policy in the ways that it's been eased through not only lower interest rates to the point that we have negative interest, but also the quantitative easing. That paradigm, that leveraging up, for example, can't continue. But yet, late in cycles, people extrapolate that which happened in the past, and so there are these surprises. I think there are always these paradigm shifts. And I think by stepping back and seeing history from a longer-term perspective is very helpful. I think the Fed made a mistake, and I think the Fed understands that it made a mistake in assuming that this is a normal cycle. And what they thought was if you pick up growth and lower unemployment, you're going to produce inflation. We're living in a different world now for various reasons, a world of a lot of excess capacity, a world of digitalization and so on, in which that's not the big thing. The big thing is the fact that we're approaching an end of the power of central banks to stimulate. So the big thing is that we have a very big asymmetric risk. If the economy turns down, and we're late in the cycle, so a downturn will come, there is a lack of ability by central banks to be able to stimulate and reverse that. And that's happening at a time there's great wealth polarity. So if the left and the right, or the rich and the poor, are at each other's throats this time, and this is when times are good, imagine what it's going to be like a downturn, and there's an inability of central to respond to that. So that shift in Fed policy, which came at the end of the year, was necessitated by these weakening conditions around the world. I think the key is us staying on top of these changes and responding. First of all, I think every portfolio should have the right amount of diversification in it. Gold is an important portfolio diversifier. However, let me be clear. I don't think anyone should have a concentrated portfolio, okay? So people can hone in on one comment I'm making. I think that the notion of creating a balanced portfolio is the most important thing that they can, because wealth can't so much be destroyed as it can be shifted. And so the world right now largely looks leverage long. In other words, there's been a lot of borrowing to buy assets, to buy companies. Companies have borrowed money to buy their equities back and so on. That whole move of leverage long is where the markets is. I think there's a vulnerability to that kind of a portfolio. Gold is one of the items that can diversify. I believe it always should be a certain part of the portfolio because there's a certain environment that it diversifies the portfolio and a certain environment to worry about. I also think that that environment is riskier, more likely, recently, now. And that environment in which it becomes very difficult to stimulate, and there's a desire to appreciate the value of currencies. Now think about a bond is really the currency. So when one owns a bond or one owns a debt instrument, one is paid a pile of currency. When there are a lot of obligations like that, a lot of debt, or even unfunded obligations like pensions or healthcare obligations that the world has, a lot of obligations, and there's not an effective monetary policy to lower interest rates and stimulate, there needs to be the printing of money, the running larger deficits. We're going to come into an environment of larger deficits that are increasingly monetary. And in that kind of an environment, currencies are depreciated. I think that in an evolutionary way, over the next 1, 2, and 3 years, a turn for the worse. Yes, I think that there'll be an environment, excess capacity, and debt restructures, and political issues. I think there's going to be an effect, a risk. Well, of course, recessions are always inevitable. The only question is when. And I think that you're seeing this around the world. You could see it in Europe, and you could see it in the States. Let's step back maybe and put the big factors in perspective, I think, and then put a time horizon. I think the big factors are we are rather late in both the short-term debt cycles and the long debt cycles, meaning the capacity of central banks to reduce, stimulate. It can be measured by their ability to lower interest rates and do quantitative easing and have that purchase. We have a problem there. Okay, that's a big thing, but it's not an immediate problem. It's a problem that is going to come in the next 1 or 2 years. You're seeing it in Europe. You see it in Japan and to some states. In addition, we have the wealth gap. And with that wealth gap, we have the classic political conflict, very much like the 90s, in which that means that there's greater polarity, greater extremes in both of them. And that will play a role, because if you change policy, you will have a big effect. For example, when we cut the corporate taxes, that puts stocks up because after taxes you get more, so you pay more for your stocks. That'll change. So we have this polarity, very much like the 1930s, an inability to stimulate in this, and a polarity. In addition, we have China as an emerging country challenging the United States as an established. And that creates a theme. That creates a protectionist type of environment, very much like the 1930s. And it also has implications in terms of all sorts of conflict and, frankly, sand in the gears of the efficiency of the economy. For example, the supply line. In other words, we built an economy in which there was interdependence and efficiency coming from supply lines working in a certain way. Now, as we enter this environment of conflict, there needs to be, for personal security, for the security of the countries, there is a move toward independence. The United States says, I don't want your technology. And China says, I can't depend on you giving me your technology. And that changes that separation, changes the nature of the dynamic, which is also economic influence. Those influences are very similar to the late 1930s. They will be dominant. They are evolutionary influences, but they'll play out over the next 1, 2, 3 years, I think, in creating a paradigm shift. The world we're going to be in is a very different world than the world we were in. The world we were in started in 2008 and had to do with central banks printing money and stimulating, and that is reaching its limit. And that's why I think we're going to see a paradigm shift.
So what do you mean by a depression? Okay. Something like happened in the 1930s. So just to repeat, 1929 to 1932, there was a fall in the economy and a very double-digit unemployment rates and a magnitude of fall in the economy like about 10%. Do I think we're in that? Yes. How was that dealt with? 1933. What they did is they printed a lot of money, and the government came out with the same type of programs that we're having now. Yes. Okay. Same thing. Interest rates hit zero. Same thing. Okay. Same dynamics. And then that money causes an expansion from that point. How long does it take for the stock market to exceed its highs? Or how long does it take for the economy to exceed its former highs? A long time. Okay. Do I think that's what we're in? Yes, that's what we're in. We've seen that happen repeatedly in history, many, many times. It's just the most recent one. And there's a structure to that. So yes, this is not a recession. This is a breakdown, an operation that I'm just describing in terms of how it's dealt with, the production of money and credit and all of that. That's what we're in. I think what you're going to see is a combination you're seeing of printing money and redistribution. And I think it'll last. These things happen pretty quickly. They last maybe a couple of 3 years in terms of that process. And then you have a rebuilding. And they're dealt with creativity. The greatest force through time is inventiveness, human inventiveness, adaptability. So you're going to see these restructurings happen. And it's the power of that adaptation that is the greatest power. I did a study that goes back 500 years, and it shows real GDP. In other words, the economic activity going back there. And there's a line. And you don't see these depressions, as we're calling them, even on that line. They barely wiggles. When you go into it and you look at that piece, that's what it looks like. GDP falls 10%, unemployment goes up, and it passes. And because the greatest force is the force of adaptation and inventiveness if we can operate well together. So that's what I think it's going to look like over this period of time. It'll pass. The world will be very different. There'll be a new world order. But it will pass and will be inventive because what we're dealing with now is just money and credit. Money and credit is just digital. There is real goods, services. Those are real. But everything else is just accounting. And so when you change the digits and you work those things out and you work yourself through, that takes, a couple of years at most, kind of. And then you come back into a restructured environment. And it could be said that it is really healthy in many ways because it is a stress test. Because if you look at history, people have gotten sometimes they get weaker, or they're not prepared to, in many ways. Weaker in terms of maybe they don't build enough savings and they operate that, or maybe they emphasize luxuries over necessities. It's a reorienting type of experience that in many ways makes us healthy, even appreciating the basics of life.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.